Okay, first things first, let's get our 2 ounces of butter in the microwave. And we're going to melt it down. It doesn't have to be hot this time. Okay, so let's go ahead and start by peeling our apples. Now, if you use a knife or a peeler, it doesn't really matter, of course. It's whatever you're comfortable with using. And just go ahead and peel your apple. Okay, and then to get the core out, or at least the parts you can't cut out right easily, just stick your peeler in, or your knife, at an angle, turn it around until you pop out like a pyramid or conical kind of shape, and it'll pop right out. That's the easiest way I know how to peel apples. Okay, and then when you cut an apple, cut it down the middle, cut it in the middle again, and then if you can see, the core is right here, and all you have to do is angle your knife downward and you'll cut out the core in a little triangle shape. Try to show you again. It's hard for me to cut at this angle. I hope you guys can see it. I hope it's worth it. And there you go. And then this time we're going to dice it into smaller pieces. And then you just put this in a bowl. Okay, so I have all my Macintosh and Granny Smith apple cut up. And right now I'm just going to give them a good toss before I add any of the other ingredients in. And that's just to make sure that there's a pretty even blend of Macintosh and Granny Smith apples. This is just to make sure that no ramekin gets more of one apple than the other, hopefully. Alright, so the next step is we're going to add some cinnamon, sugar, and flour. And I don't really have a specific measurement for this. I would just say maybe 1/8 of an ounce of cinnamon, 1/8 to 1/4 of an ounce. Like 1/2 ounce of sugar. And maybe like 3/4 of an ounce or 1/2 ounce of flour. This is all by feel. It's a very rustic recipe. There's no real measurements for the apples. Okay. Go ahead and add your butter. And just toss that in as well. And then you have a delicious rustic apple pie filling, or apple cobbler or apple crisp filling. Okay, before we add our apple filling to our pie tins and ramekins, let's go ahead and lightly butter them. I just took 1 ounce of butter and melted it in the microwave. Alright, go ahead and add your filling. Now you can also make this with peach, with blueberries, cherries, whatever fruit you want to use. It's fine. Just make sure you need to adjust the recipe for the fruit you're using. For example, if you're going to use peach, you might want to find a peach filling to use instead of an apple filling recipe, because you really can't just substitute fruits for fruits. Sometimes they work a little bit differently. Like blueberries, I prefer to use cornstarch instead of flour, or I'll use both. Really, I think I use both. I can't remember. It's been a while. And peaches too, actually. Peaches I'll use cornstarch too. Apples I'll just use flour though. Alright. Clearly, I made too much biscuit dough. But I will be having biscuits for breakfast for a while, so that's okay. So take some of your biscuit dough, roll it into a ball as best as you can, and place it inside of your ramekin. Now, the best thing to do, according to my directions, is to fill up this ramekin all the way to the top with apple filling, and then press down to make sure it's really packed in there real well. I didn't make as much apple filling as I would have liked in order to do that. But in your case, and for the recipe that I'll have available on my website, I'm going to go ahead and double the apple recipe, so that way you'll have enough. And then if you ever want to make less or more, you just cut the recipe completely in half. That way you don't have to fool around with figuring out which one was which. Don't worry if they're not perfect balls. The dough is pretty sticky. And notice that I'm going around the edges. I'm not putting any in the middle. And that's because when these expand, it'll take care of the middle. It should anyway. Theoretically. Actually, let's go ahead and do one of the ramekins first. Since this is pretty small ramekin, I'm going to make the balls a little bit smaller. Now while I'm doing this, I also have my oven preheated to 425, and I'm going to put them on a sheet pan lined with some parchment paper. And the parchment paper is just there to make sure that if there's any excess or overflow for any reason whatsoever, that it's there to carry it. Or catch it, I should say. Don't forget to egg wash your biscuits. Now remember, an egg wash is just 1 egg or 2 eggs with a little bit of water, and then you just use a brush and brush it right on top. And if you have sanding sugar, which I don't, which I know I need to get because I always say that I don't, I always need it, you can put a little sanding sugar on top. Okay, so go ahead and finish up, get those in the oven, and check in like 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, so our apple cobblers were in the oven for probably about closer to 40 minutes. And as you can see, the egg wash gave a nice dark finished color. And when they're hot, it's easier to do this than it is after you finish it. But basically, you can just pop it up at this point. But you can see that it's baked all the way through. And it's still squishy underneath, but that's because of the pie filling. So when it's baking, it's still a bit softer, so you can actually manipulate it a little bit easier without having to take out the whole thing. But basically, you're just looking for it to be completely done underneath as well as on top. Now, if you find that the top is getting darker and the bottom hasn't quite caught up yet, take one of your racks, put it as close to these as you can on top of them, and put a sheet pan on top, and that'll block it. If you don't have an extra sheet pan or whatever, you can always cover with aluminum foil too. You can do that as well. And that'll help prevent this from getting darker while the bottom's cooked. You can also bring this lower to the bottom because, since there's no crust along the edge, you don't have to worry about it burning as much. So it's just apple on the bottom. Okay, and that's how to make a simple apple cobbler. Now remember, if you're doing this at home, make sure you get the recipe off my website because I'm going to double up on the apple recipe, so that way you have more apples, so you can really pack it in there and make sure there's a nice thick layer of apple filling. Also, if you wanted to make an apple crisp, like I said before, you can just use your favorite pie crisp recipe. You can have oatmeal, you can have raisins in there. Basically, apple crisp is just like the crumble topping off an apple pie, rustic apple pie, put on top instead of the biscuit dough. And remember, the Aubergine chef demystifying desserts one recipe at a time.